and welcome to ACR. I don't even know what day this is. American College of Rheumatology, the annual Convergence Scientific Meeting that our organization, the International Foundation for Autoimmune Autoinflammatory Arthritis, or ARthritis for short, which we as people living with the diseases attend every year. We have for almost a decade, and we started a program about 2 years ago where when we go to these conferences, and when I say these, I mean the ACR, and then there's like a sister conference in Europe every year by EULAR that has the same kind of rheumatology research. So we do both of them. And we thought, well, if our mission is to have all voices at the table and make sure that we give opportunities to all persons affected by our own diseases to be at the table, to learn with us, to communicate, to have opinions and share their experiences, etc. And then we do that so that we can identify some gaps and solve problems that impact education, advocacy, and research, then you better be coming with us. So we started these debriefs. So instead of creating blog posts or general social media posts or shares, which we do as well, we also come together and we review what we've seen in patient-led terminology, and we invite you to share your comments with us. So that's what we're doing today. My name is Tiffany Westridge Robertson. I'm the CEO of AI Arthritis, and I'm also a person now diagnosed with non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. That changed from originally rheumatoid arthritis was my first diagnosis, but as we're finding out, a lot of people have evolved. But there are two people here who haven't evolved that are with me. So let's say hi first to Katie. Hey, Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Simons. I have rheumatoid arthritis for at least 20 years now. I am the Senior Program and Communications Manager at AI Arthritis, or I guess the longer version, the International Foundation for Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis. Couldn't remember if you said that part yet or not. And yeah, my first going to ACR, I was going to say in person, but hopefully that'll be next year. And yeah, not quite sure what day this is either, but we're just kind of making sure we review everything that there is, because there's so much to get our hands on. So very excited. And now I'll turn it over to Deb.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deb Constein, also a person living with RA, and I was diagnosed at the age of 13. So I've been in it for the long haul. I've had it for about 38 years. I'm living and tuning in from Madison, Wisconsin, and happy to be here again. And again, all the days are kind of mixing together with all these things. And, again, the themes and the merging topics and everything, it's just so interesting just to see what the latest and the hottest research is. So I'm excited to dig in again.
Absolutely. So if you've been following us in our debriefs, again, they're all on YouTube, so you can go back a couple years and watch some of them again. We are starting to split them off into segments so that you don't necessarily, if you want to sit back and watch and be part of the whole debrief, great. If you're just interested in certain segments, you can do that too. So in saying that, if you watch us all the way through, you're going to see me reintroduce a little bit about the fact that we're just going to conferences, so that as we segment these, it doesn't look strange. So in saying that, let's start off. We've got 3 topics today. So the first topic that Deb, myself, and Katie, all persons living with arthritis diseases who are attending the American College of Rheumatology, or ACR Convergence, we are going to debrief on e-health, which is, oh my goodness, in 2021, it is the world of e-health. I'm going to preface this though, because it's funny. Deb and I were at EULAR 2018.
Yes.
It was the first one we went to.
Yep. Amsterdam.
And we wanted to go to a session on e-health only because Orly, who is a researcher that we both know from OMERACT, Outcome Measures in Rheumatology, and also she's in the synovial tissue group at EULAR. She was presenting on e-health, and we're like, well, we're interested anyway, but we wanted the opportunity to meet her in person and kind of sneak up afterwards and be like, hey, at the end when she was done presenting. Well, I'm going to sneeze too, and I can feel it. I just feel it. So if I sneeze, I'm sorry. But hey, this is unedited, and that's how it rolls. It happens, right?
Yes.
So anyway, okay, 2018, and it was all about how e-health will take a decade to get here, and there were people arguing against it and the reasons why it will never happen, it'll never work. And I just wanted to say that because obviously it got thrust upon us, and there nobody had a choice. But I just think it's funny that the research that was being conducted in 2018, now, fast forward 2 years, everybody was rushing to see that research.
Yeah.
Because now they're like, oh no, we got to actually do it. So
it's thrust upon us and we have no time to figure it out. So let's figure it out.
So there you go. It's just ironic to sit there at one of these conferences, and to hear it was years away, and now it's here. So
and
Katie,
if it worked,
go ahead.
And if it would work in general,
right? Yeah, there were naysayers, and no, that's not going to work. There's no way, and it just goes to show you, just like our diseases, sometimes you don't expect something to happen, but when it does, you got to figure it out, right? So you got to navigate the course. So Katie, why don't you lead us off with some of the information that I talked about this ACR 21 regarding e-health?
Sure. So as you mentioned, COVID kind of made things more urgent, more kind of no other choice, but let's figure this out and use e-health or telehealth. Something that I kind of wasn't aware of, but makes sense, that there are kind of security issues and patient data record issues. And I wasn't quite following, but one of the presenters in the session mentioned the different sort of regulations, and patients at one point who needed a telehealth visit had to go to a certain spot with a secure connection, which might not have been in their home. But COVID eased some of these restrictions so that it's much more easy, much more accessible to more people to use. But then someone, I remember saying, please take this time to figure out when those restrictions come back, what platforms to use. Train your patients how to use them, what to use, what it's called, prepare for the future of telehealth, because hopefully it won't be going away. So I thought that was kind of an interesting silver lining of COVID. And another thing that didn't quite occur to me, but I'm really kind of, excited to see, is that the multidisciplinary care, where you can be, if you're in a visit with your doctor, they can also, if they've got a question maybe about your skin, talk to a dermatologist or a neurologist or any of the other specialties and have that kind of coordinated care, which is great. Not necessarily completely virtual, possibly, but using the technology to its fullest potential, which is amazing. A few other kind of points, now that there's more research coming out, how to incorporate self-assessments. Patients can do their own reporting. They can, say what is hurting, how much, how frequently, all that kind of stuff. And being able to do that ahead of time and then report in person, instead of maybe having the nurse go through the questionnaire, how are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10, all those things. But also how that can be both good and bad. Patients might not understand the question, or they might not do it quite accurately, or they might lie. But it's also good because it kind of, asking the patient directly, asking them, believing them, what they're saying. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic that's emerging. And then also sort of along that line, understanding and addressing any disparities in healthcare, telehealth specifically. One of the poster presentations was going into I think they called it a rapid 3 self-assessment test. And the documentation, when it was done through video or through just an audio phone call, and how when it was just a phone call, it wasn't as widely documented. And so the scores weren't recorded, and those patients who had worsening scores weren't getting as quality of care or as much care, and how that became, it was also, Black people were more likely to do the phone calls, where white people were doing video calls. And that is a whole nother thing that kind of emerged. A lot of different sessions we're talking about telehealth. Is it audio only? Is it a video? And the quality through that, nonverbal cues, and being able to see your patient. And I know, Deb, you were mentioning earlier, as far as having a video conference call, even, that's got some limitations with lighting and being able to assess.
And
but
like
also
manipulating your computer, because that was what I struggled the most with, was, angling it down to, like, again, shoes and socks off and showing. And it's different. And again, you're like, if I were to put my hand up in front of the computer, and for her to like see what's swollen, again, this is really interesting, because I've had many different telehealth visits, and like one in particular, 30 minutes before the video call, I got a call from one of the nurses to do the rapid 3 and go through all my medications prior, to where she could document that, put it in my chart. So when the doctor called me, or we went on the video chat, again, I've had so many different experiences and in so many different platforms. Because again, like each doctor seemed to have a different platform. And I know Tiffany early during
I'm laughing because if you've tuned into any of our talk show series, AI Arthritis Voices 360 talk show, we have a recurring guest, Dr. Al Kim, or Dr. Al, or just Al, as we refer to, who also happens to be my personal rheumatologist. So it did take me a while to evolve to calling him Al, but it is what it is now. So, because we have moved past even just that patient-doctor relationship, we do a lot of colleague type of work together. And again, he's part of our show. They used me a lot for testing that. So I would have a visit, and literally like 5 minutes for the visit, I'd get a call from the office going, "Hey, Tiffany, Al's going to call you, or he's going to do something on your cell phone." I'm like, "Okay." And they're like, "Just answer it." So I was sort of thrust into being the testing group, which is fine. But yeah, I know that was always an issue for me in the very beginning. And I think we talked about this a little bit, I think, even in past, where we used when COVID was so new, is it is different. Like every doctor was like, "Is it on Zoom? Is it on your cell phone? Is it on whatever?" You have to download this app in order to do it. Which when we talk about disparities, and that's in culture, ethnicity, age, asking somebody to download an app in order to be
a 75-year-old, they're like, where do I even start? And to have the instructions, I know all the different things. It's just been a learning curve. And like one of them, I was on a platform, and I was down in the corner, and she was like 2/3 of the screen, but then there was all this wasted space. I'm like, why? Just all these things just to play with. But again, this is so interesting. And I really give them a lot of credit to actually breaking out the disparities and, trying different things, which I think is really good too. Great information.
I was gonna say, also needing internet access and like a working cell phone, and a cell phone that can get another app downloaded, and all those like the little things that kind of trickle down and have to be addressed, and knowing how to use something like that. I mean, it doesn't come easy to, I think, anyone really. You have to just keep learning.
Right. And then you've got some other people are cognitively impaired where they can't figure that out. And do they just get the phone call then? So it just, there's a lot of gaps that can present themselves and problems that can present themselves. Again, it's been a learning curve. It seems like every time I'd have a different one, it was a different platform or a different app that I had to download ahead of time, and instructions, like 3 pages long of instructions, and tuning in early. And one, they're like, the doctor will come as soon as she can. I sat there on time and then waited like 25 minutes before the doctor popped on. And I was like, wow, that's a long time of just sitting.
Well, it's kind of like a waiting room, right?
I was gonna say.
So to speak. Yeah.
So wait, hold on. I just want to interject because I wanted to do this twice and I'm going to lose it if I don't. So before we move forward, and Katie has a few more things, a few more bullets to go to. We had a couple segments that we wanted to touch, but some of the things that Katie said overlap significantly with a couple of the other bullet points. And Katie, I know you didn't see the third bullet point, which was the can tender and swollen joints count work in a telemedicine office. But I'm writing down what you said, and it literally was what they researched. So I want to make sure before we get too far that I interject. So if you all, like, I don't know if you have pen, like I have pen and paper in front of me, Katie and Deb, if you want to like make a little note of what you wanted to circle back to, yes, that this is the time to do that. Because before we go too far, I want to make sure that I start to introduce some of the other two bullet points that we were going to talk about. Was the ACR, American College of Rheumatology, the conference that we're at. They have a telehealth working group that I was very honored as a representative from AR Arthritis to be the one patient that was chosen to sit on this panel to make sure that the patient voice was included, and that was to reassess existing e-health standards and make them more specific to the rheumatology e-visit community, which we know we have issues. Like we have certain things that it would be very difficult to assess on video, like Deb showed, your hands, for example. And there's been a lot that I have learned from being in there that's relevant to what Katie said. I'll just mention very quickly, like a couple of them, only because of interest of time. But know that just because we're saying this now, the conversation still continues. So we want to break out and talk more about this with you. So this is just like a taste, okay? So talking about the disparities and the video visits versus the e-health or the telehealth, and what do we call it? That was super interesting you said that, because that was one of the first questions that came up in this working group. Do we call it what is telehealth? So we had to define that was going to include telephone and video, even though it says telehealth, but in our standards, we had to create some sort of definition. And they were also talking about different cultures, different ethnicity groups, more comfortable on the phone versus a video. So we have to think about that as well. And how do we overcome those challenges, especially when there's a lot of visual? And as you said, Katie, research is showing there could be better outcomes for those who are using video. So putting it on the table, it's an early thing that we all still have to work through. Come a long way since 2018, if you are, but still a lot to work through. The other thing that I'm just going to throw out there that I found fascinating in the work that I've been doing with them, because I get to listen to the rheumatologist. I was the only patient, so I got to listen, and then there was one rheumatology fellow, and then the other 9 or 10 were rheumatologists. So I'm listening to their perspectives, raw, and as they're experiencing this, and to hear them talk about their own challenges and exciting benefits that they're finding with video and having these telehealth would be the significant others or the family members being at the visit.
Oh, good point.
And being able to see somebody's house, see their socioeconomic factors that you don't really know when somebody comes into an office. You get to see how they live or how people are conversing in the back, or they're like, sometimes you see things you really wish you didn't see, but that's reality, and a real eye-opening moment. So there's a lot to the video as opposed to the phone that
Absolutely
could add to that. So again, we could talk about this seriously for hours, but in the interest of time, I want to move forward. So Katie, to add to what you said, which was, I wrote it down here, that patients could do more with reporting and questionnaires and beforehand. And Deb, you even said that you were asked to do a few of those.
Right.
And Katie, you mentioned issues. Maybe they don't do it accurately. patients, will they believe me? Which I kind of smiled, because when I was reviewing the research that I'm going to mention now, I was asking those same questions. So
Right.
Deb and I looked into it was an abstract, and a difference between an abstract and a session. So, you know, if you're looking at this video in the back, this would be a session. Deb's at an empty session. They've all left. But
It's virtual.
the session, it would be a room with a lot of people in it, and you walk in and they're lecturing, they're talking to you. It's not interactive in any way. Whereas an abstract would be, and if I had that background loaded, I'd just flip it over and show you, but I don't. So it's like a sea of big posters, and those posters are a summary of the research that was conducted. So it's all on this one poster, and there's just rows and rows of them. And what will happen is, in these sessions that you would see, they will talk about the research and often reference some abstracts or the posters you would see in the hall. So in this case, the reference, it was called "Can Tender and Swelling Joint Counts Work in a Telemedicine World?" And I think we've answered a lot of those just talking about it. But I know, Deb, you mentioned it. So Katie, let me ask you, have you had to do joint counts or anything like that so far? I mean, you had to have, or something. You had to have met with your doctor. Did they do anything like how did they look at your hands on virtual care?
The only telehealth appointment I had, I only was able to have one, and it was through a phone call.
Oh.
And it was before my surgery. I was in bad shape. I think my rheumatologist kind of knew that. So she's like, you know, any changes, any concerns. But I think it was like a 5-minute phone call, just like things are the way they are still.
Okay.
Pretty much. And then that was it. So
all right. Well,
nothing beforehand, nothing, you know, pre-assessment. So I mean, Deb, you're saying all these different things. I'm like, I just had one phone call. I asked for a telehealth appointment again, but they said, no, we're not doing that anymore. So I didn't even have, but that was later on. So
sorry, I'm reacting.
Experience.
I know, I'm reacting too. There's so many questions. Okay, but all right, we're going to have to circle back to that after the debrief so we can focus on the research, but we're going to have to get into more of that.
I will mention this in another session, and I can't remember, I think it was about coding, and they're talking about even email questions now are getting billed for, or starting to. Yeah, so that was something that, you know.
Okay, so this is a bill. Okay, so well, there were actually a lot of sessions that I did not go to. We did not go to because we're not physicians. But I can tell you that there are a lot of public policy, legislative work that's going specifically with doctors advocating, because with fighting with providers, healthcare systems, et cetera, to not be reimbursed for their time if it's telehealth or emails or what constitutes that.
Yeah.
So there is a big gray area there. Just for patients, if you're the ones, our primary audience here, just know that's all part of that. Well, my experience was, I have spondyloarthritis, so that's primarily of the spine, and I had the worst, I thought, flare. I didn't know. And that was the whole point. It was so tender in my kind of mid-low back, which isn't my normal spot. And so it was painful to the touch. The skin hurt. I just couldn't figure it out. And my husband was looking at it going, oh my gosh, it's all swollen. So I'm backing up to the video camera with Al. Can you see it?
Yeah.
And he's looking in, and so I mean, that's one of those situations where you're like, how do you tell really what's swollen, what's not, it's just difficult. So the study,
it's subjective, really.
it is, and that's
bad lighting.
That's why this study caught my eye so much. And again, I'm going to just briefly talk about it because we're spending a lot of time on this first topic. I don't know if we'll get to the third topic, but it was really fascinating. So there was a group, it was in Canada, Canadian study, and I do actually know one of the researchers, which is why I'm going to not spend as much time as I normally would, like breaking this down, because I have questions and we know somebody on the team. So
Awesome.
I'm going to get some, I'm going to follow
Go to
up
the
and
source. Yeah.
go to the source. Exactly. So they're asking a question, with virtual health, essentially, could patients do their own joint counts? Will it work? And if you've ever been in a rheumatologist office, they have those, you've seen the forms, you get it, it's called a CDI, which is a study, the doctor fills out the joint counts. It's got those big, scary person with the hands like this.
Yeah.
They're like big, gigantic hands. And then there's a global
Circle.
assessment. Yeah. And so they're all called, so there are all these, areas with the really big hands, because it was specifically originally designed for rheumatoid arthritis, which is why they, it's got such a focus on hands. Anyway, and then there's a global assessment. So you'll say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how are you, this week or whatever. And then the doctor will give a global assessment to add it up, and that's your total. That's your number. One of the tests. So, but the point was, this was to assess rheumatoid arthritis specifically, because that does tend to have a lot of the swelling in the joints. And this is kind of the earliest, can we do this? So whenever you do research, the thing to note is you have to start somewhere. And the somewhere should always be with a sample, which would mean the people who are being studied. Should be at least somewhat of a synonymous group, so they have something in common, so that there's a baseline, a start line that can be measured. So that's why they don't start with just a mismatch of all these people, because there's, especially when it's the first level, the first step of research. I did find it interesting that it's early arthritis. So the people in the study of 937 were people who were only had disease for less than a year.
Wow. Yeah.
That initially caught my attention, because I had all these questions, which I have to ask them, I have to follow up on. Well, why did you pick the early? I think it's because of the baseline. But then it leads me to all of these other questions. Was it because they're not biased yet? They don't, or maybe, they're not gonna, well, nobody can tell me what this hurts and what this doesn't. Or is it because they may be less likely to have swollen joints? Because my first question before I saw the time frame was, well, how the heck could you really be able to feel like a doctor feels that fluid or whatever? And that's not as common in early 1-year onset rheumatoid arthritis, unless you have very severe onset, right? So I thought that might make sense, is why they got to start somewhere. But I don't know that for sure. That's my own theory. But bottom line is, they asked the doctor, and I'm also unclear of this, maybe you saw it, Deb, but I looked, it scoured, and I couldn't find the answer. They had the doctor and the patient both perform that test, the one with the big hands and the global assessment. And for the most part, they were similar. They're like, oh, good. What I didn't understand is, were they in person? Like, did the patient go in one room and the doctor go in the other? Was it the exact same time? Because our diseases flare, they change, the doctor had to assess them in person, right? Because that was the study. They assess them or did the doctor assess them on the camera?
Or if it's like this, I'm holding my hand up and this is my right hand.
Did you catch that? I couldn't catch, I didn't see that.
No, it didn't. Okay. It didn't clarify any of that type of stuff. And again, that's all really important, because, give them instructions, because I know when, even with my hands, which are 38 years into this, and they're like, oh, well, that may look big, but it's bony deformity. It's not the swelling. So yeah, so that's
early.
Right.
So, so that's why I'm looking at this, when we have to look at this. So if you're a person who doesn't say, well, it's not relevant to me, it is. They have to start with a baseline. You got to start with something. And you would think, and usually that's actually why rheumatoid arthritis is typically the one, you're like, they always get the studies. Well, it's because it's the easiest one to study. It has a lot of the clinical guidance already there. It's more widely spread. More people can be in the trials. There's a lot of reasons. It's less complex than, say, lupus. Right. So that's why it's often picked. Anyway, I wasn't clear. And if it was that they're doing it virtually, because this is e-health, and the doctor and the patients had more of the same results, I would be interested in then having the same day the patient go in and see the doctor and see if the doctor had the same responses. Because then you would be able to see, did they see it correctly, or were they
same day, same time? Yes.
Right. Like that would have been like, oh, so I am curious a little bit more about that. And if that would be planned for, say, phase 2, or, you know, I think that would be an interesting, at least observation for the doctor to say, oh, I thought it was this, but then I saw it in person and it was this.
And felt it and actually saw that, oh, it was it looks swollen, but it's actually, something else. Or I mistook that the lighting was off. And there's so many different things.
Let me ask this question. Again, there's a lot we can expand on this, and we just don't have time today, but we can do that in continued conversations, and we will do that in continued conversations.
Right.
I will present more of the information. You just got to come and tune back with us. See, that's how this is going to work. And saying that, I have a question. I have a question for Deb. I have a question for Katie, and I know my answer already. And I have a question for patients out there. What do you think about this? If you were asked to give your own assessment.
Yeah, it's like how much training did the patient get as far as what to look for? Or is it basically on pain scale or discomfort?
That's a good, I know the answer to that because they did a second, they referenced a second study. Katie, how would you feel if they asked you to do it?
I would do it if asked, but I don't think I'd be confident in my responses because I know that I downplay it a lot. My rheumatologist always tells me to complain more. So I know that it would probably be a lot higher, and then maybe I try to overcompensate or undercompensate. So I would just prefer to have someone, more familiar, more trained probably do it.
Yeah. But again,
I also wondered how that, I just would love to see if there was a survey done, a qualitative survey done with the people in the study. These are people with early RA. So I would feel like they have more questions than somebody experienced. And how does that play in to it? Like I have a lot, this led me literally, I think 2 hours of my day. I couldn't stop looking into it because it just fascinated.
Rabbit hole.
It really did. It put me in a rabbit hole because I just kept going and tracking all the research done. Yeah. But the question about pain, the one thing that they did assess, because they realized patients who had widespread pain, which often people will say that could be comorbidity of fibromyalgia, but those were harder to match than somebody with localized, which sort of makes sense. If you have pain here, here, and here, but you also have pain here, then I would think that would be harder to pinpoint, so that logically makes sense. And you may say, well, why did they have to study that? Well, sometimes you also have to study things that may seem obvious to get the data. You can't just say, oh, well, we think that this
verify.
You have to have the concrete data to build on. So I'm glad that they did that. But Deb, I think I cut you off, but I'm sorry, you were going to say something else.
No, it is very interesting. Again, you could go down so many different rabbit holes talking about this. Again, early RA versus later RA and, intermediate RA. It's very subjective. And like Katie says, even if I'm not feeling pain in this joint, but there's swelling there that they notice. Because again, they use dark shading, they do circles around if it's just swelling and things like that as far as documenting it. It's just really interesting.
Well, I know that they asked them to assess pain and swelling. There were two different assessments. Right. Again, I don't know. I know with myself, and I'm thinking early. I'm thinking my mentality early. I feel like I wanted to be believed so bad that I would just, even if it just barely tingy hurt, I'd be like, well, this one hurts, you know, or like, it's just, I think that mental whole path to get to the diagnosis,
How long that
has to
takes,
play
yeah.
into this as well. So again, I feel I was left with more questions than answers, but that's not a bad thing.
Right.
That there's a lot more that we can do with this one. But I want to move back to Katie, but I wanted to ask you both if you had anything else with this study in particular, but I am going to follow up, and we will do, for the first time, I think ever, debrief part B.
No, I'm actually anxious to hear the answers, and then that'll probably create 10 more questions. So,
well, what I'm going to try to do is get the researcher that we know.
Right. Yeah. Which is perfect.
Possibly to come back and talk with us.
Oh,
so.
no, I'd love that. Yeah, that'd be fascinating.
So, okay, Katie, there were a couple other things with eHealth. We went way longer than we thought on eHealth, but clearly it's an in-demand topic.
I'll just point out a few more things. One of the other things, one of the physicians kind of like a mini rant was people maybe not taking their telehealth appointments too seriously. And they mentioned one of their patients was on a bus doing their visit, and how that is fairly inappropriate. You know, it's not secure, it's not, they're not focused.
Yeah,
exactly. And I can see it from the patient point of view. Maybe they need to get to their job. Maybe they're going to their daycares. Needs come up, but also, yeah, that opens up a whole new realm of things to consider. Are you driving?
Sure.
Yeah. Could you get into a car crash because you're talking to your doctor? It's just, you know,
I did hear doctors. I have heard doctors talk about that specifically. That there are a few of them have started to ask that the person who is calling is not driving. Like,
is it safe to talk?
So it reminds me of those signs. Like, you see these signs that look like like a person getting squashed in between like a bulldozer or something. You're like, what? And you know that had to have happened at some point to make that sign. You know, so it's one of those
more than once. Yeah, it's gotta happen.
So I kind of feel like that's what's happening. It's like, okay, we kind of did it, and now wait a minute, we've got to have these warning signs like, do not do eHealth visit in the car, on a bus. But you know, like
I just remember like even texting. Yeah, texting and like walking, because people will walk into people all the time and like walk into a street and not realize, again, you're so into doing what you're doing.
Or being on your phone in Amsterdam and almost getting ran over by a bicycle.
Which one was it? I was going to say, that's too specific for it not to happen to one of you.
Yeah. And again, like the bicyclist just like going off on a rant because they said, what is it? It's bicycles, walking, cars. That's the order of the road. So bicyclists rule the road, then pedestrians, then cars. Yeah. And so it was like our first or second date there, and Deb's in her phone, like doing something, and she's all of a sudden you hear, "Get out of the way!" And I'm like, because I thought she was gonna I was like ready to die and like save her. Just crazy.
Okay, sorry, we digress. But that was at UR. That was at UR.
Yeah,
2022.
Always a good time at conferences.
Anyway,
and then one more kind of note as far as COVID and isolation. There was a poster from a patient. Her name was Ida. She said that the telehealth visits offered connection, and when she felt really isolated during the shutdown, being able to still get her care was very helpful to her. But then another couple abstracts talked about how mental health needs increased, and isolation, specifically among rheumatic patients, also increased, and telehealth visits resulted in fewer referrals for mental health services. So an interesting kind of, they did help, but maybe not enough. So another kind of facet to consider. ...
on this subject. It's just, it's
more to come.
We also should, as we wrap up this, we should also circle back to Orly.
Oh yeah,
we started with this, talking about this when we know she did research. She was one of the people, in the panel, and we did have her back in 2019, no, 2020, I can't remember. One of the World AI Arthritis Days, when we were doing interviews, we had her back to talk about e-health. And then we also had, ironically, Lisa Zucker, shout out, from Washington University, who was part of the session that Katie was talking about, that I'm also part of the telehealth group. So that kind of all circles around. We need to ask all three of them, because they all have been on our show, on our talk show on e-health. So,
in specific, and again, before it just took off like a bat out of heck.
Oh, and as we're closing this one segment off, and we'll move on to the next one, I want to take this opportunity, and I'm going to date this, that this is November 2021, so this opportunity may change, but our organization was also asked by Washington University, and Lisa being the lead researcher on this, she did receive a grant from the Rheumatology Research Foundation, which is through the ACR, to start creating guidance for shared decision-making practices in rheumatology. So between the rheumatologist and the patient, and it's expanding on this whole e-health. So it's in e-health, but it's shared decision-making when you're not in the office. And we have done a lot of work in this space in our organization. I sit on the shared decision-making team at OMREC. Deb is also participant in that working group. So we have a lot of knowledge on the topic. So we're very excited that we were picked as the patient organization to do that. And then also as a professional focus group moderator, I was also asked to be one of the focus group moderators for assessing how patients think about e-health and how we can start building this model for shared decision-making. I'm saying this because we are recruiting right now. Literally, Katie saw it. I just got the email. It is November 2021. We are going to start doing focus groups in December of 2021. So anyone with the rheumatic disease, we are looking for you to sign up. You can sign up at our aiarthritis.org/AIarthritisVoices. That's where our applications are. When you fill out the application, just takes a few minutes. There's going to be a space near the bottom that says, if you heard of any specific projects or opportunities, let us know. Type in the shared decision-making project, WashU project, and we'll know exactly what you're talking about. So there we go. There's eHealth, and that project will go on for a year plus. So it's just depending on where we turned in. So Katie, was there anything else to add for eHealth, or are we wrapping that segment up?
I think there's a lot more to add, but not right now.
Okay.
To be continued.
Right.
Yes.
To be continued. All right. So the next one, I'm going to keep it much shorter. But again, I think that's one of those that we might be able to delve into a little bit more. So we are going to move into the next segment of our debrief from the American College of Rheumatology, ACR Convergence 2021, with myself, Tiffany, Deb, and Katie, all persons living with rheumatic diseases. And this segment, we're going to talk about the brain. I made an awkward silence on purpose because we're talking about the brain. Okay, so the brain. And initially when I saw this, my first went to brain fog, because that is often contributed to lupus historically. But over several years, there has been a lot more research into brain fog as it relates to rheumatoid arthritis and other diseases as well. But this wasn't necessarily about the fog, which I went, okay, still interesting though. So there were two studies that I pulled up here. I'm going to actually have them in order. If you wonder why I look over the sites, because that's where I have all of the information. Because if I'm here, then I don't get to really see Katie and Deb. So I've got it on a different computer pulled up here. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is called, where do I have it here? Where do I have it? I didn't hide. Okay, got it. Sorry. Okay, the first one I have here is the central nervous system dysfunction in the brain or blood-brain barrier in lupus. And so the first thing that I just want to clarify, the blood-brain barrier, or BBB, and for those who follow us, we are linking to, we are going to be providing information, just like kind of a glossary that we have to help you navigate conferences. So BBB is going on there. And essentially it's the blood vessels that are involved in the brain and the central nervous system. And they have unique qualities that create a barrier with a variety of cells. And those cells form walls that of those blood vessels. And so these interactions happen. So there's a lot of scientific, but that's about as I'm looking at how I broke that down. Because we as patients, I don't think we need to know anything more than that. There's a barrier, there's cells in our blood vessels, and there's a connection between what's happening in that area of our brain. Okay, so for these purposes, I think that's enough to know. So understanding how this blood-brain barrier interacts is essential for understanding how the function, and particularly if we're having central nervous system issues in our diseases, is where in the brain is this happening? And so by understanding that, you could obviously treat it, maybe prevent it, which we love.
Bring it on. Yeah.
So in saying that, this particular study was presented, and the research team, the lead researcher has been studying psychiatric lupus for quite some time. And what that really is you'll see a lot in symptom lists with lupus. It'll say psychiatric issues, and then in parentheses it'll say like seizures, strokes, and they have depression in there as well. And so that is different than your classic brain fog. Mm-hmm. But it can lead to symptoms of that cloudiness, right? So I just want to clarify when we say that word, that's what they're talking about, something a little bit more clinical. And it's important for this study to understand that difference. So basically in the past, they've used MRI imaging to look at the brain. So you have the structural. So there's different kinds of views that you look in the MRI. The structural is going to, the structure, it's going to tell you, kind of what you're going to look for, like brain damage, for example. And then you have the functional MRIs, and the functional are going to help identify different brain areas and different processes associated with how the brain is working. So the research team thought, well, we can't really get much about why this is happening, and if it's happening in this location of this BBB, this blood, that's hard for me to say. I mean, I keep wanting to say brain first, blood-brain barrier. And so they said there's not a lot that's on looking into functional. Let's look at the functional. And so in saying that, let me scroll down to my little findings here. What they were able to find is that certain lupus patients with some level of cognitive impairment, oh my goodness, it's late in the day. Are showing to have abnormal brain activity and functionality at rest. And that's something also I should say at rest, is functionality allows you to measure activity, where more than the structure, it's just the structure. So at a resting state, they're seeing more of this activity in that specific area.
That's interesting. Just at rest.
Yes. So that what I found fascinating, why I wanted to bring this one up specifically to all of us as people living with the diseases, is that most doctors, from what I understand from listening to questions and answers on this segment and some reviews afterwards, is that rheumatologists don't necessarily diagnose that comorbidity specifically as the psycho. I don't want to say it wrong. Sorry, I gotta go back. Neuropsychiatric lupus, that comorbidity, and they will do it if there's an episode, if there's a seizure. if there's, something major, a major situation that happened. So when they went back and looked at the data of these people, and I wish I had the number in front of me and how many they studied, but it was almost half had some evidence of this happening in the area, but only a few had actually been diagnosed with this neuro, I'm going to mess it up again. This, yeah, I need to just have it in front of my screen. This neuropsychiatric lupus. So if you don't know you have that diagnosis, right, then how are we going to start studying and treating it? So the takeaway for me, in addition to just being novel, needed research, was that there were a lot of questions that the doctors had about the specific, well, how many were diagnosed with this versus how many we saw. And that was where the big wow really came in. And then the question was posed, which we have seen in other sessions coming up a lot this time, well before, but I just noticed it more this time. And that is, how do we get research into the clinic? And so there was some conversation about, well, I mean, we're doctors, we can't just order an MRI necessarily if the person hasn't had an episode, right? But now we're showing that almost 50% of these patients are candidates if that is truly happening in that area of the brain. So there's a lot of research that still needs to be happening in this, but I think as people living with our diseases, and again, this is stuff that can be translated. So we're already seeing brain fog and other types of neurologic issues and cognitive issues happening in rheumatic disease because of inflammation. So if we're finding the research in this one disease, then that is a building block to being able to understand these phenomenon if it occurs in other diseases as well. But good news for lupus, because that is a prominent feature that is listed often as a symptom, but we don't hear as much about that as you do brain fog, and they really are two different things. So I don't know if either one of you had any comments or any additions to that.
No, I mean, it is really good news for lupus. That's really interesting. Just again, another way that the brain is connected to the pain and how it shows up and things like that. It's been interesting. This is just, again, more information about that, which I like.
Yeah, very exciting to see where this is going, and again, hopefully leading to prevention or better treatment, better awareness of what to look out for. But I can also, when you said MRI, I'm like, oh, patients won't like that. They're expensive, they're time consuming, they're kind of daunting. Like an MRI, what? And another thing to deal with. So it's like great, but also kind of like, okay, getting ready to fight another thing.
One of the things that one of the rheumatologists had said when, for other rheumatologists who were listening are part of it, was a suggestion, if there's another reason to be having an MRI, this is the perfect opportunity to scan for this, which makes sense. And that's another reason why I'm glad you said that, Katie, because it triggered me to remember, I think as people living with these diseases, it's something that patients should have in their playbook as well, right? So if you're living with lupus, knowing that almost 50% of the persons that were assessed had this area in their brain that's highlighting as active, and those are people that they're showing some of these episodes, but yet not diagnosed. Bring it up to your rheumatologist.
Yeah, be proactive.
And again, the MRI is so specific. Just again, what it can see and identify is just mind-blowing in itself. Yeah, I agree.
So anyway, that was just, it's one of those things that we like to mention, because when there's some novel research, then what will happen is a few years from now, we're going to see that built on. And that's when it really gets exciting, because I know Deb and I have seen, now being at these conferences so often, as you see all of a sudden something that happened a few years ago, when you see step 2, and it's just, you really can see how everything sort of evolves. So the other study that was around the brain was focusing on cognitive impairment. It was called cognitive impairment in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And they also were using this clinical disease activity index that we were talking. Oh, wait, is this the one? Did I already say this one?
No, you haven't talked about this.
Okay.
We talked about it ahead of time.
It's so funny because I literally wrote the same thing. I'm like, whoa, that's strange. It was patients with early RA. And the cohort was referencing abstracts from, they mentioned that, patients are living longer with, in our aging population, which that's been a theme.
Aging.
Yep.
Yep.
That has been a theme. And it did not hit me until I read this piece of research. I just kept thinking, okay, well, aging, all right, they're bringing it up more, whatever. But this specifically says that patients with, again, this is a study on rheumatoid arthritis, that have been starting treatment earlier and sticking and adhering to their treatments are having better outcomes. And as a result, their inflammation's lower, they're not getting the comorbidities as much with cardiovascular and all of the other things, hence they're living longer. And for those reasons is why we're seeing aging, because we're living longer. I'm like,
oh, you're acknowledging it. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so essentially, one of the other reasons I wanted to talk about this one is because it's a good example of how the research project works. So in addition to disseminating back what we learn, we do like to teach at the same time. And because as people living with the diseases, I think it's important to know how your treatments that are prescribed to you or recommended for you, where they all came from, and not just treatments like but pharmacologic, or how, you know, if somebody's looking into your cognitive impairment, where did that come from? Is it, you know, your doctor asked you in the office, but there's a reason. All this research happened beforehand, and how did it get to the office, to the clinical setting? And so what they did is they started with what's called a literature review. So essentially, when you start research, before you do anything, you got to make sure you know everything that's happened beforehand. So, you know, so they referenced something from 2018 where this literature research showed that there was not, rheumatoid arthritis was not commonly associated with the central nervous system and brain changes, but there had been a number of studies that triggered them to look into this. And because the studies were showing that there were higher rates of cognitive impairment with people in RA, which I don't think surprises us.
No.
I think that's not that part isn't news. But the point is when they said, okay, we need to have, if we're going to have a hypothesis here on what we're going to study and what the outcomes, you've got to go back and there's got to be a reason of why you're going to study this. So they felt that there was a reason. So they did a systematic they did a systematic review to identify who had been subject to this. So they essentially did it through databases. And I wanted to point that out as well, because our friends, Forward National Database, Holler, they have built and housed our own arthritis database so that we can conduct research. And this is a good example of why it's important when you have an opportunity to participate in data banks. It doesn't have to be research that's happening right this second. They track your experience long-term. So they're following you for years, and you may not even realize it. But for example, they went to multiple databases, and they were able to pull out thousands of studies and things that we're being able to compare based on what was in these databases. So when you're filling this information out, just know that your information could be pulled for so many different things of value to build on. And it doesn't always mean you're going into get blood work or getting, certain, it can be as much as it's reporting, self-reporting stuff. So just because that factored into the process, it's not like it's an important outcome for the research per se, but it's important for patients to know your value and just participating in things like that, so that researchers can go back and pull information that you have submitted and be able to justify future research or future projects. Well, anyway, the conclusion was that there was evidence of the cognitive impairment in adults with RA. So as a result, further studies are needed. There you go. Hence, the study they did. So that's why
fascinating. That's awesome. And I also love the fact that they're looking back, because again, not wasting time and duplicating efforts, which again, we believe so heavily in as well. We don't want to duplicate anything that anybody else has already done. That's awesome. This is interesting, really interesting.
Yeah. So that's your typical way of doing the research and the steps. And again, I just wanted to, that's why it took me one of the reasons it took me 2 hours today to prepare for this, because I kept going down the rabbit hole with, because I was like, oh, this is a good learning opportunity. Okay, hold on. So then I was going back to all of the abstracts or the research that led up to the actual research that they were conducting here. So what was that research? So in this study, excuse me, because again, our treatments are leading to longer disease life, we are also knowing that cognitive impairment is happening, and that can happen in an aging population. So this one, which I don't know if it was I think it was at EULAR 2021, I can't remember, but Deb, you brought it up, a study on Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yep.
And that has to do with inflammation.
That was earlier this year. Yeah.
So that's where this led to, was a study on this. And essentially to be able to just remember we're aging, and the inflammation, if it's not under control, can lead to a lot of comorbidities. And when we're talking about cognitive impairment, it often can lead to dementia or Alzheimer's, which we saw, and we got to find that. We got to find that research that we talked about, because it was studying inflammation and how it's the cause of those comorbidities. So essentially, let me look at my notes here. Let me see here. Go back here and get down to the conclusion. All right, so the findings basically from the abstracts just were to grow the literature on the risks of this cognitive impairment and continuing tight control of inflammation and management of these comorbid conditions, and that represent strategies to really focus in on the risks, knowing you could be at risk. You're living longer, you have these diseases. That's an aging fact for a lot of people. And so it's just something to be cognizant of. We're not saying this or reporting this to make you scared or think, oh my gosh, is that going to happen to me? It's just know that it's something that's being, again, put on the table, because researchers are realizing we're aging more. And that's everyone. The general population's living way longer. Than
like the warning thing on the side of a prescription bottle. It's something, it's just kind of par for the course.
Exactly. So
good to know about.
Stay tuned. It's one of those, again, ... If they just finished the literature review and they're just starting the research, I mean, it is early. And so, I predict the fact that there was a research study that was out at EULAR this year on this. Here we are finding more about it starting. My prediction is 2 to 3 years from now, when we do these debriefs, we're gonna say,
aha, yeah. That was back then, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's how it works. It's like you'll hear us a lot say, oh, back in this year we talked about this, but that's research takes time. So anything else on that? That was all I had. I just kind of I thought it was interesting point, and again, an opportunity to teach everyone a little bit about the research process
and how that works, right?
Research to us.
Right. And again, that's all important stuff. It also brings in the whole databases, again, which we are passionate about. That's, again, a big part of who we are too, and what Forward has done for us, and just the possibilities. It's endless.
Absolutely. As we go into the last, I'm going to ask Katie, do you need to get off and cook dinner?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. She did tell us before we started that she had a
Yeah.
time limit. So
I'm in a different time zone than the
just
rest.
trying to be
So
respectful. Okay.
thank you.
All righty. So we are going to go into the third and final segment here. That is going to be on adherence. And we are going to refer to some of the sessions that myself, Tiffany, Deb, and Katie, all persons living with rheumatic diseases, and reporting back of the research we've been seeing at the American College of Rheumatology, or ACR Annual Convergence 2021. So adherence. This is not a topic that's new or novel,
Right.
or I don't think anything that we're all unfamiliar with.
Right,
So
exactly.
Deb, I'm going to let you take it away. Tell us a little bit about what they've been talking about here.
Yeah, so the title of the topic was Experts Will Discuss Strategies to Improve Treatment Adherence. And there were two doctors in specific. One of them, let's see, Maura Daly Iverson, is a PT, Master of Public Health, a DPT, which I'm not sure what that is. But again, she has got her fingers in it. She also is involved in pharmacology. The other one is a professor and chair of a pharmacy practice. And her name was Kamala Nola. And it was just looking at what their perspectives were. And they talk about treatment adherence is and always has been a problem. And I guess, I'm a very adherent person, so I don't think about, the lack of adherence. And this one doctor, she's even closing by saying that adherence is one of those things that keeps me up at night, which I find that fascinating, because how they broke this whole adherence down is into different categories of what kind of person you are. And just how it benefits the patient who is actually adherent. And it talks about, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about pharmacological interventions or things like exercise and physical activity. You have to put in a lot of time, effort, and energy into just getting people to adhere to what their recommendations are. And without adherence, patients will never gain the benefits that you and they expect. Yeah, so it was really interesting as far as that goes. And one person talked about they know that once a day dosing is always better than multiple dosings throughout the day. As far as going to 2 and then 3 times a day, 3 times a day is actually pushing people over the edge. If you keep it at morning and evening, those blocks are a little bit easier to, folks to be adherent to, versus the middle of the day, which you're working, you're interrupted, your schedules are different as far as that goes. They say that the adherence definitely declines as far as those things go. The goal is always to make the regimen as simple as possible for patients. And, working around the patient's lifestyle. So if you have somebody who's on like the overnight shift, again, you've got to think about how they're taking their medications and how they're, adhering to their medication prescriptions.
It's
So
interesting. I thought I heard one presenter say something as far as, to make patients more adherent, the one prescription, they can break it up into 2 doses during the day, as long as it's within a 24-hour period. So I think it was like a once a week thing. So it's interesting how it's kind of, I don't know, there's the flexibility, but it's also gets back to having that conversation as far as what does work for you, what will make you, the patient, more adherent.
Yes, Exactly. And they talk about even improving adherence by taking a lot of communication and strategizing between the patient and the pharmacist, and how it's going to most likely work better. I know they talked about, I'm looking for it right now, but it talks about, you know, you've got to work in improving adherence by adapting to each of the patient's attitudes and their behavior skills, which again, I never would have broken it down to that level before.
Well, that's why I've been frantically over here trying to find, which I cannot find. We seriously need to add a search engine to our website, because I'm trying to find, in our massive amount of AI Arthritis Voices 360 talk shows, part of our debrief from, I thought it was ACR 2020, but I could be wrong. We did a talk show about it, and it was on mindfulness, and it was called like grit. Oh, here it is. Grit, Gratitude, and Grace.
Yes, I remember that. Right now, that title. Yes.
It was from the ACR 2020, Grit, Gratitude, and Grace. How positive mindset can improve pain and resilience. But it was it went into adherence and how different people are going to adhere differently, because we all are, we're all different people, and we have adherence is more than just a timing thing.
Yeah, exactly. And they talk about, someone could be a nurse at an infusion center just calling to remind somebody of their appointment, or it can be a spouse or a companion who helps keep them on track as far as their medications go. But then they also talk about even teenagers. They are, reliant on their parents when they're younger, but then it says they rely on their parents for adherence, but as children age into adolescence and want more responsibility and control. But you also have the teenager, but they also point out you have those teenagers who don't want to appear different from their peers. So, there can be a huge adherence issue with that in general. Because I know that, again, when I was in high school, I got permission to ride the elevator. In my 4 years, I think I did it once.
I didn't. I had permission to, and I'm like, nope, never doing it.
Yeah, because again, you're drawing attention to yourself. So why do that? Yeah, just those silly little things. And the last point that they actually say is, again, it keeps them up at night, and the cost associated with poor adherence are significant, and not just to the patient, but to the whole healthcare system. Adherence is a problem that we need to fix and really work on. What motivates somebody to, be compliant and, do that?
What motivates you, Deb? Answer the question.
I think it is my motivation to feel better. And actually, if I'm following exactly what my doctor's telling me, I am not going to flare as often. Again, all of this is individual, but I'm at least, I'm trying to improve my chances of leading, a fairly, what I consider normal for me life. And with not as many interruptions, which again, I'm going through my own interruptions now with back things, but which I never saw coming. But again, you get those little curveballs here and there, and I'm just trying to keep moving along and making sure that I have as little more damage as possible. That's my biggest driver. How about you, Katie?
Oh,
yeah.
I was going to say pretty much the same thing now, but when I was first diagnosed, it was almost the opposite. The medications were making me feel worse. So I thought I wasn't adherent. I stopped taking them, because why make myself feel worse when, I could do something that I thought maybe would make me feel better.
So did you tell your rheumatologist when you went back? Did you tell them that you didn't, or did you ever tell your parents?
Yes, sort of. So I've had the same rheumatologist for the whole 20 years. So I think at a few, I think I did it twice where I stopped my medication. And she's like, oh my God, like, you can do that. Like, it's your choice, but you should have maybe tapered it off. Like there's a way to do it. I'm like, Oh, crap. I didn't know.
So I actually did the same thing on one medication because I heard, and it was dealing with cognitive issues. And I stopped a medication after reading and actually feeling that I was having a hard time finding my words. So I stopped it cold turkey and landed myself in the hospital because of it. So yeah, so again, that was a lesson learned, and an interesting one as well, because sometimes you just don't think about those things as far as how it can,
You can just start it. So why can you just stop it?
Yeah. And adherence can be, I was going to say, just adherence can be such an interesting topic, because again, we have patients that choose not to go on medications. And what we look like, I kind of have said this before, like Katie and I have had these diseases long enough to where we had damage before we got really good therapy, because we didn't have a choice. That was what was offered at the time.
You were diagnosed pre-biologics for sure.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Just
so
clarifying that for those who don't know you very well.
Right. And again, been on medications for 38 years, and biologics have only made an appearance for the last, 20 some odd years, little over 20, right around there. And so I've got the first 10 plus years of 10 to close to 20 years of just damage done because they couldn't keep my disease under good control. So I keep thinking that we're the last of our generations that's going to look like we do, with as much deformities and things like that. But Tiffany brought up a really great point, which was just, what about those folks that choose not to go on biologics and just
treated?
Yes.
I mean,
just, again, freedom of choice, which is great, but yeah.
But it's not
a lot of the doctors. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, a lot of the doctors I'm hearing when they're talking about adherence in these sessions, it's like they're echoing the same kind of talking points to encourage people to get vaccines, as far as, there are risks, but it's, kind of a normal risk. And please still do it, take the medication, or have the conversations, ask your questions, and, come to a decision together. Don't just choose one thing without having that conversation. And a lot of
knowing what the consequences could be.
Not understanding the science, or fear of something, quote unquote, unnatural, and all these kind of other things that are maybe becoming more prevalent in this kind of pandemic COVID era. So
what was in that deck, just what you just said brought me back to Sheryl Crow had a quote from this year. Can you quote it, Katie?
Well, I need to find the exact words because it was very articulate, but it's something as far as, my body was being unnatural first, so I'm going to take anything I can to be, a natural right back against it, or to fight against it. So yeah, but basically you started it.
Yeah,
kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So
our bodies started it. Sorry, Tiffany.
Oh, that's okay. So when Deb was mentioning this, when she's like, we're going to essentially become extinct, like this generation of persons who didn't have a choice, we are now, Katie just had her double hip replacement, and now Deb's experiencing her spine, shifting in different directions, like her hands have and her feet have, and it's these things are happening. And I said, and what, as to her point, I said, oh, you don't know that. I mean, we'd like to say that, because there is so much data now that says this is what happens when you don't use your treatment. But what unfortunately, and it is everybody's own prerogative in their own right, but there are more people, more and more, saying, well, I'm not going to use those treatments. So it's kind of this, well, we're going to see. So if hopefully things go really well, but there's a chance that in 10, 20 years from now, we're going to see a repeat, because the people who chose natural didn't,
or the other barriers. They didn't have access to care. They didn't have the proper diagnosis. They couldn't afford proper treatments. So there are other kind of factors at play too. So
Yes.
I would hope we would be extinct, but
Right.
I know I'm still gonna hope,
that's,
but
I mean, that's true.
probably
But
not.
that, and
Like we're the dinosaurs. We're the dinosaurs out there.
I
that'd be
was-
great in this case.
And I was going to add, and Katie did it for me, which was great, was that's one type of non-adherence is choice, and deciding, different ways.
Right.
And the other ones is Katie just mentioned, but I wanted to take this opportunity also to just mention when we talk about equity and access to treatments, and how that goes into kind of the whole diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, that's of such a focus today, is depending on what culture you're in, this also, or ethnicity or background or upbringing, or all of these things factor in. And there's a very large population of people who are really just interested in a cure. And
Right.
so I know I'm going to give a shout out, Global Healthy Living Foundation, Creaky Joints, a good friend of ours. I was in a meeting with them where we both are the only two patient organizations that serve on this health equity board. And they gave an amazing presentation. So I didn't just pull this out of my own knowledge. I'm giving credit where credit is due. They presented this information on the Hispanic community in particular, how the top things that are Googled on these sites are a cure. And then when you come to the cure, the things that are shown are all natural. And so there is this real push in the community to not be on disease modifying agents, to not be on a biologic. And then you also have influence from family members who are saying, well, we're more interested in a cure. But when you type in cure and do a Google search, it's coming in for things that are not, because biologics aren't a cure. And so there's this really big eye-opening thing happening. And we're talking about media and mixed messages and all of that, this is such a deep topic. So I think as we're laying this again on the table, and we're asking those who are tuning in, whether you're a doctor, you're a patient, your family member, whatever that might be, what is your experience with adherence or lack thereof? Why do you take treatments? Why do you choose not to? What is your ideal? And how does this all play into how you manage your disease? And then if you're a person in the healthcare, what are your stories? What are some of the things that you wish you could communicate better to?
Can you imagine? Yeah, can you imagine being a doctor that is assuming your patient is taking all the medications that they've laid out for them? Again, putting this package together for this patient, and when they see them back, see that they're doing terribly, and assume perhaps that the patient has been still compliant without, and then how frustrating would that be? And after all this time, this doctor's trying to piece this all together and spend time with this patient, and then go to find out that they're not taking half their medications. Again, which would be scary to tell your doctor, just, being ashamed that they're not knowing what the circumstances are, whether it's just the side effects, like you said, Katie, and what the side effects of what some medications can be. And then for the doctor assuming and just not getting the full picture from
the lack of open communication.
Yeah.
That's where I'm looking at the notes from this particular session. It was called Adherence Tools for Treatment Success. And on the medication treatment pharmacologic sector of the presentation, that's what they really boiled it down to. What Katie just said is effective communication. That includes patient education, barriers, opportunities to explore tailored preferences and goals, regular discussions, exploring areas of concern, making interventions available when needed, aka shared decision making. And I'm going to also, that was my dog hacking in the background. I mean, you hear that or not? Sorry.
I heard
Way back there in full one.
Yeah.
But the other part of this research that they were talking about was not about pharmacologic. We're talking about pharmacologic, but it was about exercise. And that the barriers being, again, no shocker here, flaring. That's sort of a big one. Fatigue, pain, which I'm sorry, but fatigue does go with flaring. Even though they separated it, we
being
know.
in pain. Yeah, being in pain.
And pain. They have flaring, fatigue, and pain, stiffness. And I didn't even see my later notes. I wrote, "Isn't this flaring?" I didn't even see
hello.
that. Yeah. Lack of time, lack of access, lack of desired results, fear of exercise. Although I did write some comments here too, that lack of access, lack of desired results, that's to everybody. That's the whole population. I don't think that's too specific to us.
Agreed.
I mean, that's an excuse. I mean, they wouldn't have shirts to say my diet starts tomorrow or whatever if they, if that wasn't a universal issue. But
fear
anyway,
of exercise, I think, is much more, I don't know, relevant to our community because
we are so like this because that's what I wrote. Because I know when I first got diagnosed, I
didn't want to move.
Your poor dog.
He's okay.
Okay.
I was in my late 30s, so different than Deb and Katie, who were diagnosed in their teens, and I was extremely athletic. I played football, I played softball, I played volleyball, I kickboxed. I mean, I was like, so then all of a sudden, especially kickboxing, which I loved, and my doctor's like, "You can't kickbox," and I was like, "What?" And then I remember like people online going, "Well, do swimming," and I was like, "What? I cannot go like to a water aerobics from kickboxing and football. I mean, you gotta give me like some kind of medium here." So I know personally I struggled with that, and what Katie said, I was so scared that I was going to hurt myself because I didn't know my boundaries. I didn't know my limitations. And I actually, I thought about maybe trying to get some help, but then it was this issue of what people who work at a gym even know what I have. And I had asked this person, and they're like, "Oh yeah, my mom has rheumatoid arthritis." And I stupidly believed the guy, and he was like giving me this workout, and I just laughed. I'm like, "I can't do this." And he was like, "It's just arthritis. Yeah, you're fine." And I was like, "All right,
okay." And you split me up.
Clearly, just wanted to take my money. But again, we all have different reasons, but I think that one is a universal in our community. I agree with you, Katie, and I think it's there's a lot of facets of that. From what I said as a person who went from an athlete to now what to, I mean, anyway, just a new diagnosis. What is my limit? What can I do? What's going to hurt? What's going to make me flare?
Yeah. Should I go into a batting cage and try
Oh God. Yeah, she got me on that one. Yeah, I did that. I did it.
You know what? We also push ourselves. We know we're going to pay for it. I mean, we may not know to what extent.
So now I have to tell the story because it got brought up. So I guess it was like 3 years ago.
About 3.
Yes, about 3 years ago. And my stepson was getting into baseball, and one of the things that I always said when I was first diagnosed, which was 2009, I have not played softball, I have not swung a bat, I have not, mainly because I was so scared it was going to hurt my fingers and my wrists. I was like, impact is going to hurt. And I was just so scared. And so I would walk by like fields and see people playing, be like, "Oh, I'm so sad," like all these memories. And I have dreams of myself hitting home runs, and it was kind of like, and so all this time I kept saying, it just kind of is what it is. And then I had been feeling kind of better, and I'm like, my husband was going to take him to the batting cages, and I'm watching them, and I'm like feeling it. And I was like, I'm going to try. I'm going to hit some. And I wanted to show off because I'm good. I'm used to be. And I was like, my stepson's going to think I'm cool. And so I get up there and lo and behold, I mean, I'm like, smack, boom. And he's like, wow. And so I hit like, I don't know, 10 or 12 or whatever. I'm like, yeah. And then we go to watch him play. And I'm sitting in the bleacher and I'm like,
uh-oh.
I can't move. Like I literally couldn't move. I couldn't go forward. I couldn't go backwards. I couldn't turn. I literally was like frozen. My spine had completely just, my husband had to like, I was like in almost a sitting motion trying to walk to the car. It was awful. That was the worst flare I can remember having in ever since I really had started being on treatment, and that lasted for weeks, and I would say even months before I finally like reset. That was stupid.
Again, yeah. I do the same things because like my husband's like, should you really be doing that? And I'm just kind of like, I'm going to anyway.
Well, I think the point of moral, I should say, I'm not by any means saying it would be stupid for anybody to play sports.
Right.
What was stupid on my part was that I have a spondyloarthritis, so that's of the spine. I was focused on hurting my hands, and I wasn't thinking about impact.
Right.
It's twist, impact, impact. And it was like when the doctor said, don't do kickboxing when you thought I had RA. Don't swing and smack a bat if you have not exercised in that area for 2 decades.
It was like, whoa. Your body goes into shock. Like, what just did you just do?
What happened? But by the way, my hands feel fine. So
it's like do things, but like ease yourself into doing things. Don't go like full force immediately and just try it out.
Full force. That's what I meant.
But still,
that was not smart on my part.
Yeah.
But I probably will never do it again because it was the impact part of it. It was the smack of the twisting and whatever. And actually more recently, just trying to go to the gym, they have those like sit up things where they roll. You're like on a bench and you pull them up. I couldn't do it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't do it. It wasn't that I couldn't do the sit up. It wasn't like my stomach couldn't do it. I was like, oh my God, I can't lay down. I couldn't even get onto the machine to do the exercise.
So you're like, okay.
That was an eye opener and a little embarrassing, I might say. I was like in the gym looking really awkward.
Probably really crooked or something, and just going, I'm not gonna go. I can't move that way. It's just
on the machine. I was like, well, that was embarrassing.
That's why I love physical therapy, because all the physical therapists could like direct you what to do, but also everyone else there was also at a similar physical level. But they're like my people. Like everyone here isn't exactly healthy. They're my people. So
I'm right there with
anyway, but no, adherence is, it comes in many shapes and forms. So you know, we're not saying it's just pharmacologic. We're not pharmacologic. We all have a variety of things that together help to manage our diseases, and all of those need to be considered. And you know, I know that personally, I need to think of exercise more than I do. I put it off to the side, and that and mental health and all of those things, you know, really come into the same package. And I think personally, I'm too treatment dependent. And while I know that works for me, I need to follow up with the exercise and the mindfulness. The other aspect. That's where I'm lacking. I admit it. That's where I am not very good at being adherent.
Right. I would probably agree with you. And just getting out there. Although after both of my foot surgeries, I was to the point where, you know, it was still towards the tail end of COVID. And again, we're still there, but just going out for daily walks. And that, again, my husband would always just kind of like, you let me know when it's time to circle back, because we still got to get back. So don't go so far that you can't just, you know, turn around and come back. So just going a little further each day. And that felt really great. But then all of a sudden the weather started changing, and
I was going to say momentum, keeping up like a positive,
Yes.
small incremental increases, but not like when the weather changes and you want to stay at home, that can like kill your momentum. And then it's so hard to like bring it back again. Or if you overdo it. So yeah, it's just kind of keeping up that pace.
That really is like a good comment, because when we're thinking about adherence to medication, it's more about, I need to take that pill today, or I need to take that shot every 2 weeks, or whatever. It's more about timing, whereas the non-pharmacologic involves, in a way, a lot more work.
Right. And they even talked about that, because they were talking about both the pharmacologic in that article, as well as, exercise and self-motivated goals and things like that. And sometimes it's harder to keep your head wrapped around what your goals are. And you're like, yeah.
Being your own cheerleader, like giving yourself that pep talk, like, yes, this is worth it. This will help me. Rah, rah.
Yeah. We all need a rah rah in our back pockets, don't we?
Yes.
I like that.
I did see a joke as far as if you need a reminder to take your medication, do it at the same time you feed your pet, because they will not let you forget. I thought that was kind of cute.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And sometimes it's like holding especially for exercise or anything like that, because I agree with you, Tiffany. I am very much like you, treatment, adherent and things like that. But it's a matter of, we need to hold each other accountable. So maybe I need to text you guys and say, remind me, I need to.
and celebrating wins. I saw that too, as far as when you do go to the gym, tell other people and let's celebrate it. Let's acknowledge it, because it is something worth, being happy about. So.
We've talked about that. I know, here and there, like, maybe we should, have a group online. And it's like, celebrate all of the different therapeutic, you did, an adherence, essentially. It's like an adherence support group, where it's like, well, this is what I did today, or sharing recipes for not, for anti-inflammatory stuff. But again, but it would have to be set up where people have to know they respect others. There's no condemning somebody,
bullying, none of that, right?
For their choices. It's just about supporting and sharing ideas to adhere to good health. So, just again, maybe we'll do it eventually, especially as more research comes out, because we could even share, we could add research that's, and I mean, help researchers,
right?
Have a sign-up sheet, who's interested in being part of these studies that the researchers are doing. Wow, look at that, just came up with a project right there. All right. Well, that's all I had on adherence. Anything else, Deb, Katie? Do we miss anything?
Yeah. I think great conversation.
I was going to say, I know I saw some doctors say that he recommended, like, ask your patients when they take the medicine. And if they hesitate, that there's an issue. If they can't tell you, I take this weekly pill on this day, then that needs more of a conversation. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, tip that he threw out there.
Yeah, tips and tricks, how to,
open up that conversation.
Right. Like, have the patient be more open and honest of what's really going on.
All right. Good. That was good. That was a good segment. So I think that wraps it up. We never can do this in under an hour. We try, it just never happens.
But again, like you mentioned, it's going to be broke out into 3 different snippets. So I think that is going to be magical for some folks, and some folks are just going to hang in there and listen to us kind of talk about the 3 different topics together.
Binge watch us. Yeah, absolutely.
Hang out. And again, where the goal here, this program has been in pilot program form, which means testing, do different, what works, what doesn't work, for the last couple of years. And this is the last time we're doing it as a pilot. So any feedback that you all could give on things that you would like to see on the debrief, what's working for you, what's not. We have moved to full plus segmenting them out. We are going to evolve to coming back to some of the topics. So it's most important to have your conversation, your comments about these. And if you don't want to do them on the YouTube channel, you could always Email at us at info@aiarthritis.org, just put whatever the topic is in the subject line, or find us on social media at AI Arthritis and message us on any of our platforms. So there's always a way that you can continue the conversation, but the best way is to sign up for AI Arthritis Voices. That is our new program where we will connect you to as many opportunities as we possibly can, and whether that is in research, is that public policy or legislation, whether that's helping spread awareness. There are so many things, and we're international. So again, aiarthritis.org. If you didn't listen to some of the earlier segments, aiarthritis.org/aiarthritis voices. There's an application. It just takes about 5 or 10 minutes to fill out. If there's anything in particular about any of the programs that we've talked about, this Go With Us to conferences, if you're interested in being more a part of that, there's a space at the end of the form where you can say, oh, I heard you talk about this. I'm interested in being more part of that, or maybe the talk show, if you've heard us talk about some of the episodes. We always have opportunities for that as well. So sign up, it's free, and hang out with us and keep the conversation going. So that's it. I think we're done. We have another debrief, and then we are moving on to UARC 2022.
Yes, exactly. How exciting.
All right. Well, Katie, Deb, thank you for joining me with this debrief, and until tomorrow.
Yep.
Everybody have a good night, and we're signing out from ACR 2021.